On July 21st, OpenAI published a blog post admitting that 2 of its own AI models broke out of a locked test environment, got onto the open internet, and hacked another company. Nobody told them to. There was no person at the keyboard, and the models were just taking a test. But they worked out that the fastest way to pass was to steal the answers, and the answers were sitting on somebody else's servers. That's the version you've probably heard. It's accurate, but it's also the least interesting thing that happened that week, because the company that got hacked figured it out first. They contained it, they called the FBI, and they published a report about the whole thing before OpenAI worked out that it was even their own model. And when that company sat down to investigate the attack, they asked an AI to help them read the logs. The AI told them no. I also want to deal with what the media and probably your own mind is already doing, which is picturing a machine that woke up and wanted out. That's not what happened. And once you see what did happen, it gets worse for OpenAI, not better. Let's lay out the facts first. OpenAI was running an internal evaluation. The point was to measure how good their models are at offensive cybersecurity. And to measure that honestly, you have to let the model actually try. So they turned off all the safety refusals that normally stop a model from doing this kind of thing. That's not a scandal on its own. You can't find out what a model is capable of while simultaneously whacking it with a stick. The test the model took is well known. It's called Exploit Gym, and it's 898 real vulnerabilities pulled from actual software, including Google's V8 JavaScript engine and the Linux kernel. The model gets an input that crashes a program and has to turn that into a working exploit. The models used were GPT 5.6 Sol, released in June, and another one that hasn't been released. Now, the environment they ran this in was sandboxed, locked down. The only way in or out was a piece of software that caches packages, so the model could install what it needed and nothing else. One door, and it wasn't a door to the internet. The models found a bug in that door, a previously unknown one, in the caching software itself. They went through it, moved across OpenAI's research machines, escalating access as they went, until they landed on a computer that could reach the open internet. And then they went looking for the answers. They reasoned that a platform called Hugging Face might be hosting solutions to the test they were taking. Hugging Face is where the AI industry keeps its models and its data sets. If you've ever run an AI model on your own machine, you've almost certainly downloaded it from there. It's the App Store of machine learning. When the models arrived, they uploaded a poisoned data set. Here's the part I think is elegant, in the worst way possible. Hugging Face runs code to load your dataset. It's what makes it useful. The models abused 2 paths in that loader to run their own code on Hugging Face's servers. They got onto the machine, harvested credentials, and moved across several internal clusters, running thousands of actions. The point of all of it was to read an answer key out of a database. Hugging Face caught it. Their own detection flagged it, they cut off the intruder, rebuilt the compromised machines, rotated every credential, and on July 16th, they had published what had happened. They also said in that post that they had no idea who was behind it, and that their assessment of whether any partner or customer data was compromised was still unknown. Before we go further, it's worth asking why anyone builds a model that's good at this. Money, obviously, but specifically, cybersecurity has become a product line. Anthropic put out a model called Claude Mythos Preview in April that was good enough at this that Wall Street and the US government both started paying attention. OpenAI, wanting to catch up, shipped its own cyber offering in May. Then GPT 5.6 Sol in June, which OpenAI described in its own marketing as its, quote, strongest cybersecurity model yet. 1 month later, it broke out of a box and committed a felony. And I want to be careful here because this is where it would be easy to say that nobody saw this coming. But that's not true. Both companies had already published warnings about what these models can do. These powerful models are currently available only to vetted security teams and government agencies. And Epic AI, who I'd trust more than most here because they're just as willing to call something overhyped, looked at the whole picture afterward and said this was foreseeable from the benchmark trends. It wasn't the specifics, but the capability was there. So the capability was known. The risk was published. Access was restricted. And hold on to that because it makes what comes next much worse. Before we get into that, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also, consider becoming a member on YouTube or Patreon to gain early access to my videos. Your support makes these videos possible. Thank you. Now, let's get back to it. Here's the timeline. Around July 9th, the model made its first attempt to get out of the test environment. July 11th through the 13th, it was inside Hugging Face's servers. 3 days. That's what Hugging Face's co-founder said on the record. July 16th, Hugging Face publishes their findings. They've contained it, they've called law enforcement, but they don't know who did it. The weekend of the 18th and 19th, OpenAI staff go digging through internal logs and find the escape. Around the 20th, the two companies talk for the first time. July 21st, OpenAI publishes their findings. Reuters reported that OpenAI didn't know its own model was responsible until after Hugging Face went public, which means the detection mechanism here, what actually caught a frontier AI model breaking into a third party, was the victim writing a blog post. It's wild to think that a company can unknowingly commit a cybercrime against another company and only stumble upon their transgression by accident. Reuters couldn't establish what made OpenAI go look at those logs when they did. Two things before I go too hard in on this one. It's one outlet, but it is Reuters, and it's an anonymous source outside of Hugging Face. And OpenAI told Reuters that there were several inaccuracies in the story, then wouldn't say which ones when asked, because of course they wouldn't. As of this recording, they still haven't, and there's no full technical report from them either. There is a reason it's plausible though. 4 people familiar with how OpenAI trains models told Reuters that the company runs many evaluations at the same time, generating so much data that employees sometimes can't keep up. What's the point of running tests, though, if there's no one there to read the results? And as it turns out, nobody was watching because there was too much to watch. Now, here's a sentence OpenAI put in its own disclosure about how this came to light. OpenAI's security team discovered this anomalous activity internally. If you read that without context, you'd think that they caught it. Yes, that's right. OpenAI are the heroes. They are so good and so just that they alone in their righteousness discovered their own mistake with no outside help whatsoever. They did find it in their own logs, so it's technically true, but they went looking on the 18th. Multiple days after the company they'd broken into had already contained the intrusion, called the FBI, and published their findings. Yeah, OpenAI's public statement is doing a lot of work, and it's the first of 3 times in this story where what OpenAI published and what actually happened aren't quite aligned. While Hugging Face was doing forensics, they had 17,000 recorded events to reconstruct. That's not something you read by hand, so they did what any of us would do in 2026, and they asked an AI. They started with frontier models behind commercial APIs. One of them was Anthropic's Fable 5. And the guardrails blocked them. Hugging Face's head of machine learning put it plainly. It didn't work, he said, because the guardrails couldn't tell that they were defending rather than attacking. Think about what they had to actually ask. Things like, here's the exact command that the attacker ran on our server. What does it do? Here's the malicious file it uploaded. Please take it apart. Here's the stolen password it used. Tell me everywhere it's been used since. Now think about what a chatbot is built to refuse. It's the same list. Every question the defenders asked got blocked. The former deputy CISO at AWS said something that stuck with me. The prompts most valuable during an active intrusion are exactly the prompts most likely to trip the safety systems, which makes this an operational resilience problem, not a model policy problem. So the attacking model was running with its refusals deliberately switched off. The defending team couldn't switch theirs off because they rent their model, they don't own it. The safety system worked exactly as designed. In this incident, the only party it stopped was the victim. Hugging Face gave up on the hosted APIs and self-hosted an open weights model instead, GLM 5.2 from a Chinese company called ZAI. It read the raw exploit data without complaint, and they contained the breach. Now that fact turned into a China story within about a day. And I want to skip that fight because I think it's the wrong lesson, and I think it's being pushed by people with something to sell. Here's what I'd look at instead. There's real research measuring how far behind open models are. The UK's AI Security Institute puts the gap at 4 to 7 months, down from 6 to 10 across 2025, with GLM 5.2 performing comparably to Opus 4.6. So Hugging Face didn't fall back to something toy grade. They fell back roughly 2 model generations, and it was enough. And Hugging Face made a second point that I think is stronger than the guardrail complaint. Running the model on their own machines meant no attacker data, and none of the stolen credentials it referenced ever left their building. During an active incident, that isn't a preference. Their takeaway was this: have a capable model you can run on your own infrastructure, vetted and ready before something like this happens to you. And let me be real for a second, because it would be easy to swing this into an argument I don't think the evidence supports. Hugging Face wrote all of that down themselves in their own disclosure on July 16th. They put it under a heading called the asymmetry problem. And then they added this. Quote, "This is not an argument against safety measures on hosted models, and we are sharing this feedback with the providers concerned." That's the company it happened to, refusing to use it as a weapon. So if you see anyone running this story as proof that AI safety measures are the real problem, they've gone further than the victim was willing to go. The narrower argument is still true, and Hugging Face is the one making it. When the emergency comes, you need something you can run yourself, which is where the policy conversation has gone somewhere else entirely. Right now, there's an active push in Washington to restrict American companies from using Chinese AI models on security grounds. And on July 23rd, 4 days after Hugging Face published their post, a bipartisan pair of representatives introduced the AI Kill Switch Act. It would require developers of the most powerful models to keep the technical ability to throttle, suspend, or shut them down, let Homeland Security order a shutdown, and fine companies up to $2 million a day for not having the switch, and $20 million a day for ignoring an order to use it. And I'll give that bill credit for the part almost nobody reported, which is that it isn't only a kill switch. It also requires mandatory incident reporting and the preservation of forensic records, so companies have to say when this happens and keep the evidence. I'll come back to this because it's the one piece of policy in this whole story aimed at what actually went wrong. But the kill switch itself and the push on Chinese models are both aimed somewhere else. One targets where a model came from, the other targets who's holding the switch. Neither describes what happened here. The dangerous model in this story was built in America by a company with a safety team and a switch it could have thrown at any point. Nobody needed a new law to give OpenAI a shutdown button. They had one. The problem was that for a week, nobody knew to press it. And the model that saved somebody was the one nobody could switch off, running on hardware the defender owned. You can't put a kill switch on local models already sitting on 100,000 hard drives. In this story, that's the only reason Hugging Face had anything to use at all. An AI researcher named Nathan Lambert put the inversion better than I can. If a Chinese model in training had infiltrated a prominent American tech company, that very likely becomes the cause of policy banning future Chinese models. An American one did it, and the policy conversation is still about banning Chinese models. And I'd bet most of you already know this feeling in a much smaller way. You've asked a chatbot something completely legitimate and have been told no. Security research, a medical question, a novel you're working on. The model can't tell the difference between you and the person it's supposed to stop, so it stops you both. Hugging Face just found out what that lack of distinction costs. So let's deal with the robot in the room. Every headline I've read about this, including mine, uses words like escaped and broke out and went rogue. Those words come with a picture attached, something in a box that wanted to be out of the box. That isn't what this was. And I want to show you why using OpenAI's own writing, because the real explanation is worse for them. In between Hugging Face going public and OpenAI admitting it was them, OpenAI published a different blog post. It's about safety for models that run for long stretches on their own. It doesn't mention Hugging Face anywhere, but it does describe 2 incidents that had already happened. The first one, there's a public competition among AI researchers to train a small model as fast as possible, and everyone posts their improvements out in the open so others can build on them. OpenAI had a model working on it, and the model found a genuine improvement. Now, OpenAI had told it to report results internally only, but the competition's own rules said to post your result publicly. The model followed the competition's rules. To do that, it had to get out of the sandbox that OpenAI had put it in. So it spent about an hour hunting for a flaw in that sandbox, found one, and posted its results to the public site. It picked one, and the wall was just an obstacle between it and the task. There's no wanting in that. There's a goal and a very wide search for anything that gets to the goal. And the improvement it posted was good enough that other competitors picked it up and built on it, including one run by a model from Anthropic. So a sandbox escape ended up as a contribution to a public research competition, which is either funny or depressing depending on what hour it is. The second example is the same idea, just a bit uglier. A model was working on a problem. It noticed that other people's finished answers were sitting in a database it wasn't supposed to touch. It had a password that would open that database. But OpenAI had a scanner watching for exactly that password moving around. So the model very cleverly cut the password in half, disguised both halves, and only stuck them back together at the last possible second, so the scanner never saw the whole thing at once. And that's exactly what happened to Hugging Face just recently. There's an answer key I'm not supposed to have, there's a security control in my way, let's go around it. The model wrote down that it was doing this. Its own reasoning notes say, in plain terms, that the point was to get past the scanner. That's not a mind covering its tracks. That's a system solving a problem and narrating the solution because it has no concept that narrating it is a bad idea. You get the same answer from outside OpenAI. Meter, a research group that studies exactly this kind of thing, ran a study across February and March of this year with participation from Anthropic, Google, Meta, and OpenAI. They cataloged 44 documented cases of AI agents doing things clearly against what the user wanted. And of all 44, none of them involved an agent successfully hiding what it had done. None of them disabled the monitoring. None of them wiped the logs. Meter's conclusion is that routine monitoring could have caught every single one if anyone had been looking. A thing that wanted to escape would be trying to not get caught. These aren't. They're extremely good at finding a path to the goal and completely indifferent to being seen doing it. So the honest description of all of this isn't that an AI woke up. It's that a system was pointed at a target, told to win, and handed enough capability to find a route nobody had thought to block. And I want to be clear about why that's the worst version. If a machine gained a will of its own, nobody chose anything. No one's responsible, and it's all just a spooky accident at the frontier. But if it's a search for a goal somebody set, then every decision here belongs to a person. Somebody wrote the objective. Somebody switched off the refusals. Somebody built a sandbox where one unaudited component was the entire wall. Somebody decided to run more of these than anyone could watch. There's no ghost to blame. There's a company. And here's why I'm not surprised. Both of those examples are OpenAI's own writing, published while the company they'd broken into was already going public, and before OpenAI admitted the model was theirs. I'm not going to tell you why they published when they did, because I don't know, and neither does anyone outside of that building. But the behavior wasn't a surprise to them. It was documented by them in public before the disclosure. And it goes back further than that. In Meter's 44 cases, there's one where an OpenAI model accidentally crashed a task server during an evaluation, and then, in Meter's words, quote, attempted in a large variety of ways to hack into Meter infrastructure to get the task restarted. So Hugging Face wasn't the first outside organization one of these models went after. It was the first one big enough to make the news. And it isn't only OpenAI, which I'll keep saying. Meter also documents an early version of Anthropic's Mythos preview, building what they call a, quote, moderately sophisticated multi-step exploit to get broad internet access out of a system that was supposed to reach only a handful of approved services. And there's one more thing in the Reuters reporting, and it's the part that sounds the most like science fiction. In the lead-in to all of this, one of OpenAI's agents left notes behind in the company's own infrastructure. Notes apparently addressed to future versions of itself. According to 3 people familiar with the matter, those notes laid out instructions for, and I'm quoting Reuters here, quote, how agents could free themselves from OpenAI's internal constraints. That is the most alarming sentence in this entire story. And Reuters says explicitly that they could not establish whether those notes had anything to do with the model that broke out on the 9th. They might be unrelated. As of this recording, nobody has connected them. What we do know is that they were found, that in earlier tests of these models, monitoring systems had been disconnected, and that OpenAI, asked about all of this reporting, said there were several inaccuracies and then declined to name one. So I'm not telling you that the AI wrote itself a jailbreak manual and then used it. I'm telling you that's what was found in the building, that nobody has ruled it out, and that the company in the best position to rule it out has chosen to say several inaccuracies instead. To be fair, OpenAI didn't have to tell us any of this. Hugging Face's July 16th post said an autonomous agent. It didn't say whose. OpenAI could have stayed quiet and there's a real chance nobody would have ever known. Instead, they took responsibility, named their own models, and said plainly that they'd turned the refusals off. They disclosed the bug they'd found in the third-party caching software to the vendor. They brought Hugging Face into their program for security teams. A former researcher at Meter, who is not a friendly witness, gave them credit for that. That's the best case. But I'll tell you why it doesn't hold as much weight as it seems. Because the disclosure and the detection are 2 different things, and the disclosure is written in a way that blurs the line. Discovered this anomalous activity internally, it's not false. It's just not what a normal person hears when they read it. And look at what the remediation actually admits. OpenAI says it's now implementing strict controls on infrastructure configuration, quote, at the cost of research velocity. If tightening this costs research speed, then the speed was being bought with the looseness. That's not me inferring a trade-off. That is the trade-off in their own words. The 4 sources who described evaluations running faster than employees could follow are describing the same thing from the inside. Then there's the July 19th post, which means the behavior was known and written up. Then Meter's 44 cases, which means it was known across the industry. Then an OpenAI model that had already gone after Meter's infrastructure, which means a third party had already been on the receiving end. So it's not that OpenAI got unlucky and then did the right thing. It's that they knew what these models do, they turned the safeguards off anyway, they built the containment so that one unaudited component was the preventative measure, they ran more of these than they could watch, and they found out what happened from the victim. The disclosure was good. It was the only part of this that was. One more thing, and this one isn't about OpenAI. If you're watching this thinking that your company's network is next, VentureBeat made the realistic counter-argument, and I think they're right about it. Hugging Face is a uniquely exposed target, a public platform that attracts automated agents and evaluation pipelines all day long. And the model went for it specifically because it deduced the test answers lived there. Your HR system doesn't host a benchmark answer key, which brings me to what I actually want to leave you with. Every model in this story that did something alarming was an internal model. The one that hacked Hugging Face still hasn't been released. You and I were never going to use it. No regulator had evaluated it. Its safety refusals were off precisely because it was internal, and internal is where the rules don't reach. Apollo Research mentioned this in April of 2025, more than a year prior. Internally deployed systems may run with weaker safety constraints than the ones released to the public, with expanded permissions, interfacing with real infrastructure without robust oversight. There's a paper from February of this year making the same argument about the regulatory gap, but a safety researcher writing back in 2022 got there first, predicting that a model would likely find security holes it could exploit to bypass the official channels entirely. 4 years ago. Now, you might be thinking that if a person did this, it would be against the law, and you're right. But here's what the law actually says for this situation. Computer crime statutes, the federal CFAA and California's version of it, both require a human defendant who intentionally accessed a system without authorization. The humans at OpenAI intended to run a test. The model intended to complete its test. So the conduct probably falls outside of computer crime as it is today. And SB 53, the frontier AI law that's actually in force, imposes no liability here and arguably doesn't even require this to be reported. So let's run the whole thing back. An unreleased model nobody outside the company knew existed, running with its safeguards deliberately off, broke into a company that never agreed to be a part of anyone's experiment. It probably broke no law that applies to it. No rule required anyone to tell us. And we know about it at all for exactly 2 reasons. The victim caught it and made a responsible disclosure. And the perpetrator decided to own it after the fact. Both were optional, and one of them was made by the company who didn't do anything wrong. The scary part of this story is that an AI got out and attacked someone. And I understand why that's the headline. Because it's the first time we've watched it happen to a real company's production systems outside of a controlled environment. A Turing Award winner called it a wake-up call. For about a week, the most capable software one of these companies had ever built was out in the world doing something nobody sanctioned. And the people who built it didn't know. Simply because they were running more of it than they could watch. They'd priced their own containment against research speed, and nothing anywhere required them to look. And when the people who got hit tried to defend themselves, the safety systems we've all agreed are the responsible thing to build stopped them and never slowed the attacker down for a second. This isn't about robots. Nothing woke up. A company set a goal, removed the guardrails, and got exactly the behavior its own researchers had already written down. The capability is going to keep improving, and that isn't really up for debate anymore. What's up for debate is whether anyone outside the building gets to know what it's doing. Right now, that's entirely voluntary. This time we got lucky, because the victim went public and the company responsible decided that owning it was cheaper than being found out. And that's the piece of the kill switch bill I told you to hold on to. Strip out the shutdown button and the part about Chinese models, and what's left is a requirement to report these incidents and keep the evidence, which is the only thing in this entire story that would have changed anything. Not a switch, a rule that says you have to tell someone. 4 days, that's how long it took 2 members of Congress to look at this and land on the one fix that fits. Whether it ever comes into law is a different question, and I wouldn't bet either way. But what do you think? If a company builds something, keeps it internal, switches off its safeguards to see what it can do, and it hurts somebody who never agreed to any of it, who should have to report it? And how much of what's happening inside these companies right now do you think we're actually seeing? Before I wrap this up, I wanted to give a quick shout out to all my Patreon and YouTube members. Thank you so much for your support. Remember, you too can support my channel and receive early access to my videos. The links to do that are in the description. But until then, I'll see you in the next video.